Welcome to the Queer Witch Project, your resource for all things queer and witchy. I'm Damona Peacock, a fabulous, non-binary, neurospicy, ordained queerdo with a fascination for all things symbolism, cycles, and patterns.
And I am Moonkittee, a queer femme poly kitchen witch and a proud geek. Today's topic is queer astrology with Ken Dell.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So I would like to introduce Ken to our listeners for a moment, and then we will be asking him some questions and picking that astrology-filled brain, which I love.
I am so excited about this.
I met Ken years ago through a friend of a friend through that conference that we used to all attend back in the day. And I'm not even going to count the years because I don't like to count years. It's been some, though.
It's better if you don't.
And Ken and I immediately hit it off because I speak numerology and Ken speaks astrology. So it's not the same language, but there's a equally shared fascination and overlap. So I think we just began a friendship by picking each other's brains. Yes. And to tell you a little bit more about how fabulous my dear friend Ken is, our dear friend Ken, he is a queer, polytheist, and animistic witch, voodoo assant, and works in several traditions, initiated into two. Primarily, Ken is a teacher and initiate in the Unnamed Path, which is a queer tradition for men who love men. A spiritual tradition for men who love men. And of course, to be noted is that their first love was astrology when it comes to learning to listen to spirit. Astrology was what you first fell in love with. So definitely one of your primary spiritual languages.
Yes.
A very amazing human. I'm so happy to be able to share.
I'm so excited.
You.
And I know I don't think I've ever actually formally officially met you, but I have definitely followed your stuff for a while. So I'm very excited about this.
Passing.
Yes. But we wanted to start out with a question that we are asking all of our guests. Because again, we're the Queer Witch podcast. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to determine, what does the term queer witch mean to you?
I'm not sure I ever really thought in those terms because it means so many different things, and I hear a lot and that I identify with, and maybe some things that I don't. But when I think of the word witch, I just love the way it sounds and the way that it's the power that it implies. But it's something that'll draw you in, but it's as you explore it, I think you get to know a little more, and it is different for everyone. I do like reading books, but it's when I actually started practicing a tradition, which was the Unnamed Path, which was the first one I formally practiced, as a way of opening up and looking at in an animistic sort of way, and things opened up in a way, because I'd always read books on astrology and took it from a very from what the book says and what the aspects mean, but then I started listening, and I think to me that's a level of witchcraft. I've never really studied anything that is, or until recently, that could be labeled as that specifically, but I think just in general. And I guess that's my long way of saying anyone who's connected to the language of the unseen, the language of symbolism.
Yeah.
The looking for the power of truth inside oneself to have an effect over their environment. And basically, because I think where it means so many things to people is really where your passions take you, where what you care about takes you, and being able to focus on what that is inside and bring it out into the world in a way that isn't necessarily like through school or through, what the mainstream says are acceptable ways, like in a job, even though, if you can monetize it, great, and do that. But I think that it's certainly not something you get like a degree in or peer reviewed or something like that. But I mean, not to say that the community is, invalid. It's absolutely valid, but you know what I mean? It's not mainstream.
Right.
It's othered. And it also carries the weight of history with it, going all the way back, hundreds of years, and what happened in, different cultures, and whether it's witchcraft or folk magic or whatever culture called it.
Right.
Some were much more accepting than others, or were able to unfold it into in a better way. But that's a very long conversation that I'm certainly not qualified to go into right now. Just the weight of what the word can carry and what's implied with it. And queer is another one that carries a lot of weight, and it is to me, I've started identifying more as queer because I think I saw the meme a few years ago, and it was as simple as that, not gay is happy, but queer is pissed off, or like throwing the bricks and stuff like that. I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's just something that feels more right. I do identify as gay. I do identify as queer as well, maybe because some of the practices I have are not what you find in the mainstream, so that queer also carries the sense of being odd with it. It also, maybe not in this country, but what language can mean queer. Not now, but I don't know, 100 years ago, they would say queer as meaning odd, something that isn't. So there's something that's maybe a little off, and that the idea of that satisfies.
I think about queer witch in the terms of, like, historically, you could both say that both of them are a reclamation.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Because both have been used in very derogatory ways.
Yep. As reasons to cause harm.
Absolutely. So to identify as that, there is a level of power, the power of identification that comes with that. And the responsibility of that identification as well.
Yeah.
You say you're something, especially something where you deal with powers of the unseen. If you say that's what you are, they may take you at your word and expect you to do things. So, that's my take on, be careful of the words you use, because words are powerful.
Use awareness when choosing the words you use.
Right.
Yeah.
If you reclaim them, you have responsibility for them.
Yeah. They're not, it's not something cute that you just want to.
Oh, yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, astrology being your first love, what drew you to astrology?
My first memory of anything along that lines comes from my grandmother, who she didn't practice anything like this, but I remember her talking about she was a Cancer, and she would talk about, when you're born on this day, this is what it means. And then she told me, this is what it means born on your day. And then she was saying, because her birthday was so close to the line, that she's a cusp, because she was very close to Leo. My grandmother was a Cancer, now I have a better understanding of all that. And, and she was definitely a Cancer. It was, I think, the imagery, because I'm a Scorpio, so the imagery of what a Scorpion was really is that is the most, I saw a picture of it and I'd never seen it. That is the most weirdest thing I've ever seen. So I wanted to know more. And then, it's poisonous, and this and that. And it didn't go, I was very young when that was. So it was just, that was my first exposure to it. But I remember very specifically in high school, when I was studying for, going to age me, I was in the library in the reference section. This is back in the, the Pleistocene with Dewey Decimal System. And we even used Ibid and Loxet, and, probably don't even know what that is. That's okay. Never mind.
I remember Dewey Decimal. I learned that in school.
I was in high school, and I was tired of reading what I was studying. And I was in the reference section, and I saw a book on astrology. I'm like, it's, you see it here and there. It's not like I ignored it ever since I was a kid, but it's just not something I never focused on. So I just pulled the book down and just started reading. It wasn't revolutionary or anything, but it just explaining what the signs meant. And that sounds very general, but it also sounds, I kind of like that. And it just drew me until I got a book. But it also talks about other things like moon signs and things that I had no idea what, I had no clue. But then I got a book, only astrology book they'll ever need, which, spoiler alert, it wasn't. But I
think I had that one back then too.
Yeah. A lot of people
Yeah.
You know, I've heard that. But it explains what the chart is in the most
Yep.
basic fashion, and what houses are, and what the time of birth means. And, you know, didn't have charts or anything like that to figure all that stuff out. But I was very curious about, you know, and it had these basic charts of where you can put each planet. And, you know, I was pretty much doing cookbook astrology at that point, just because I have ADHD, and part of my is making lists and putting things in categories, and that makes me feel a little, you know, it's soothing in a sense. So something new I can do this with. And so I started doing it with me and my mom, and, you know, just the people that I knew. And then I remember I think it was my uncle. And by the way, none of my family practiced any of this stuff. A lot of them I would call naturally that way. You know, some of the things that I have, I know I've inherited specifically, but nobody is a practicing, at least not in the generations that I know.
I understand that completely.
But I do know, you know, like my dad would know things before they happened, and there are stories of my grandparents, and, you know, all that we all have.
Yep.
That, you know,
I
I have the cousin who, if she tells you not to get on a plane, don't.
So funny.
You know, that kind of thing. So we know that this kind of stuff is kind of filters down, and but he bought me a book, and it was one of the old standards by back in like the 70s and 80s. I think it's like, you went to Linda Goodman, and you like Linda Goodman's sun signs. I think, don't quote me on this, but it's my understanding that kind of started a new revolution in bringing astrology in a mainstream form. I mean, and I honestly think it might have been late 60s or at least the early 70s. And it was called Sun Signs, and it was a rundown. She was very witty, and it was very relatable. And that wasn't the one I got. I actually got the second one she wrote, which was called Love Signs. And it was a bigger book that explored the sun signs of each sign. And it was, you know, very heteronormative. It was, you know, late 70s. It was, you know, this is what the signs mean. And then when you put them together, you know, Aries man and Aries woman, Aries man and Taurus woman. And it went the entire way through each combination of what they were, and then the gendered pair. This was late 70s kind of stuff.
I like to joke that a lot of our ancient traditions came from the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the rise of neo-paganism, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, it was an entire cultural revolution. So, I mean, there were things that were going on, but I think it was just more, certainly not.
And I'm not turning my nose up at the history of it all. It's just funny.
Oh, no, not, yeah.
Yeah.
It just became very much more visible, I guess, or accessible. I don't know. The 60s seemed to let it go of a lot of the old mores. So Pluto and Virgo.
Queerness has also done a similar trajectory. And I'm not saying like all pagans are queer and all queers are pagan, but there's a beautiful overlap, and it's like
there's
some
a
of
lot
my
of
most
overlap.
favorite humans in the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah,
because both are all about being rebellious,
right?
In a sense, not in a sense, you know, being rebellious. It is.
Yes.
Depending, especially in a culture, you could be really going against something where you could be breaking laws.
Yeah.
You know, especially back in the 60s, you know, the laws hadn't evolved yet. So where was I? Oh, the love signs. And what I loved about love signs, and this is something that I enjoy doing, before each one, she had a quote from a book. And I think it was Peter Pan, and it was the original, you know, text of what Peter Pan was. And each quote kind of described in a nutshell what the quip about what the nature of this relationship could be in a very small way. And that is something that I have run with, as, you know, if you know me, you know, I do this. I love looking at the signs of astrology in pop culture. It is a language that I can see coming out even when people aren't even aware of it. But I remember the one that specifically got me, and I don't remember the quote verbatim. It was for the Gemini Scorpio relationship, because I was in high school and I think I was in love with a Gemini at the time. This is a pattern of mine, which I will not be getting into on this podcast. But Scorpio and Gemini is an interesting combination. We make amazing friends. They fascinate me, and I'll leave it at that for right now. It's just on the deeper level. But something about, and like I said, I don't remember the quote verbatim, but I do remember it said that all pirates are superstitious, the Scorpio, the superstitious pirate. And the first sign that a ship is accursed is when there's one more on board that can be accounted for. And so when Gemini, you're dealing with two people. So that hit me on such a profound level in just this text. It said almost the entire relationship in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And that is my experience with Gemini is that, and obviously being very general because we're much more than our sun signs. But when I have many dear friends who are Geminis and they know who they are, but there is something very odd when I'm talking to someone, when there's one more on board that can be accounted for because you can sense it in that sense. And they're not the only dual sign, but I think they are the most obviously dual sign.
Right.
And it's just that, and when I hate to say, talk about people as their sign, because like I said, there's so much more than that. Gemini energy, someone who has Gemini energy, and because to me, astrology is all about the energy we exude, and how that manifests. So the Gemini energy, where there's always another side, there's always another, sometimes more than that, but at least there's more than one. And it's that's a fascinating thing to, somebody like me who is that detective Scorpio type, which is what's going on here. There's something they're hiding, or maybe they're not hiding it, but there's more here than they're showing. And I want to know, and that kind of thing.
It's funny because my Gemini energy, I blame for being both polyamorous and polytheistic and an ADHD communicator.
Yeah.
And same with me as dualities. I am Sagittarius, Sun, Gemini, Moon, and Libra rising. So it's all about dualities. I said I couldn't be anything other than a bisexual switch.
Yeah.
Because there's always that other aspect of something else coming in.
Yeah, I don't have anything in Gemini that I do. But I have the south node of the moon in Gemini because my north node's in Sag.
So that means you're really not doing the Gemini relationships.
That explains a lot about, well,
Doesn't it though?
Yeah, it just means that I've been there. If you look at it in terms of, I look at the nodes in terms of spiritual evolution. I've been there. You've been there, done that. And it's like, okay, it's fine to go there, but I'm not going to learn anything more from it. And that's kind of what it is. There's this fascination. There's almost a comfort in it. But it's not, I can, as with any south node thing, you can take what you've learned, but you need to apply it to the north node, which is Gemini is very specific about facts and data. And this is what this means. And this is what this means. Where Sagittarius is more about this overarching theme of belief. It's like the difference between the forest and the trees. The trees would be Gemini, and the Sagittarius would be the forest. It's the experience of it all. So, and that's where my north node is. And I have other things in Sagittarius as well, but that's the only thing I have in Gemini. My duality comes more from Pisces energy that I have, because I have a lot of Pisces energy, which is also the two fishes, I
understand that double water life.
Yes, a lot of.
I love that your grandmother was a Cancer.
Yeah, and my mom's a Pisces.
Like, oh, no wonder you love me so much.
My grandmother's a Cancer, my mom's a Pisces, and I'm a Scorpio.
All that water.
All that water. It's
so much water.
It wasn't always lovely, but
I get this beautiful vision of an ancestry, like water itself is an ancestral spirit in your line, and your matriarchal line.
Oh yeah, very, very much so. I would love to know more. I don't know my grandmother's chart because my mom doesn't know what time she was born. So I can do a solar chart, but I can't do the full thing. And I tend not to. When people say, "Well, I don't know what time I was born," I'm like, that's not the way I work. I can tell you.
I need to know the house. I need to know where that horizon lays.
It's not the whole story. I can give you some real general stuff.
It actually leads us really into our next question, because we kind of touched on that. Is like sun signs and smaller portion of their big three. There's their moon and their rising signs. What aspect is the most exciting for you to look at in someone's chart? Like, what informs you the most about that person? Is it the big three, or is it some of the other smaller ones that kind of stand out?
It's different for everyone, because first of all, I want to know someone's sun sign, because that's a basic sense of energy. You kind of get where they're coming from. If they know more, that's great. Honestly, knowing someone's moon sign until you get to know them, you're not really going to see that unless they get into a very defensive position, because that it's almost a protector if they feel threatened, because the moon always wants security. And the rising, sometimes I like to guess someone's rising. The closest I can usually come is, I can guess the element. But the way I read a chart is I have an animistic relationship to the energy. Like, to me, astrology is all about energy, and it's the energies that's coming from what we call planets or whatever, and it moves through us, and it comes out in us in the different ways. And the specific kind of energy each planet has is specific, but it's also very large. It's bigger than just one thing. It encompasses a lot of things. It's almost like a scope that I find, because it depends on its relationship to all the other planets or the sign that it's in, that can kind of shape what that is. And I'm not even getting into the other, like the scientific stuff, like DNA and background and, the things that being in a meat body that make us who we are, that obviously comes into play as well. So how does this, it's almost like that's the filter it all has to go through, and they all kind of work together. Because I don't consider psychology, I don't consider astrology a pseudoscience, because I don't consider it a science. It's not, it's mysticism. That's just my opinion. It doesn't, you can use scientific theory, the principles and how it works, but because of how I'm not a scientist, astrology is never going to follow that, because it's not empirical. You can't measure things in the way that you need to.
It's funny that you say that, because historically, astrology and astronomy were not separate.
Oh, absolutely.
They were the same
they were
thing.
the same.
And somewhere along the line, one became just studying the positions of the planets and the movements of the planets.
Right.
And then we separated it and said that now there's this other thing that's studying the meaning of the measurements and the movements of the planets.
And depending on the culture, the astrology might have come first. Because astrology came up in different cultures. That is not a one-for-one exchange. And I have a friend who does Geodish astrology, and there's a practicum she went through that I really would like to do. And that's Vedic astrology. They use the sidereal system. It's very, very, its methods are very, but it made sense. And when I asked for what the differences are, and she kind of explained that I want to do it, but the practicum, you have to know the history and the culture and the language and the why things came to be, because it's so much more. It's about culture. You can't just say this is at the same time as this, or they're the same, because they're not.
We have to also acknowledge that, other people have different views of the sky than we do. Which is also just, as a kid learning that, it's just like, whoa, or even when we talk about the Wheel of the Year, we're always very focused on the Northern Hemisphere, because that's our lived experience.
Right.
But then on the flip side, there are our friends in the Southern Hemispheres that are experiencing,
different skies. Even
and
in astrology,
seasons.
You've got to flip it over if you're in the Southern Hemisphere when you're doing a chart. Because this actually also goes back to how I learned astrology. I would sit and do charts by hand and using a protractor, because because I wanted to understand. I didn't quite get what the charts meant in the book. It didn't make sense to me, so I learned how to do it by hand, because I'm a nerd. But they had charts. I own it. But they had these charts that told you the how to and it's been so long I don't even remember how, but I remember sitting there for hours drawing out charts, and I would actually do them for people for money at a certain point, because I had this calligraphy thing and I could make them look pretty. And the word.
And then the internet came along.
Yeah, it just got easier. I even learned how to use the logarithms to find it, because it's all math.
Wow.
But anyway, that's goes back to the part on how I learned it, and I think that's when I started feeling it more than reading it, and seeing it on such a level, on that kind of level. But going back to your question and what I was trying to explain, and also the learning, moving into working in traditions that are animistic and energy ecstatic, and I have a very animistic relationship to astrology. I focus on what the energy is, And it's all dependent on how everything works. So people can hand me a list of what they're like, they print out a list where their sun is here and their moon is here. I can't do anything with that except the very basic. Okay, this is what this means, and this is what this means. I have to see the wheel.
Okay.
I have to see the wheel with everything on it. And then I know this sounds strange, but I don't read the chart reads me. And it's almost like I go into trance. Like I have a very hard time writing things down for people because I have to pull myself out of it and then write it down and then go back. And so it takes forever for me to do that. So it's better when I give readings, I do them either online or, you know, like we're on Zoom right now, or in person, or or I'll do an MP4 or something where I record it. Because I can't write like that. It's very
love
difficult.
listening to your rambles. It works for my neurodivergent brain. I am an
and
audio.
Mine too. Yeah. That's
right. The channeling, the giving and the receiving, right?
Yeah.
And I agree. So as a numerologist, it's about the vibrations, and you say it's about the energy. So like I get, like when you're saying you read the chart or the chart reads through you, it's because and I do this with tarot as well, which there's also a lot of numerology and astrology related to tarot, right? And it is about the vibrations and patterns and and just being able to put words to them so that people can internalize, can receive the message in a way that they don't have that beautiful interpreter in their head like you do. So I'm here for your rambles.
And I love that you said that, because to me it's like, oh, you read the future. No, I read patterns. It's about recognizing patterns of behavior, because that doesn't tell you what's going to happen, but maybe the style in which it will come through. And patterns repeat, and you can see this, that, the names may change, but really the places, the names, the exact circumstances, but you can see things being repeated, and it's through patterns that we see that. And astrology is the language of the symbolism of that. And as is tarot and numerology, I would imagine. So when I look at a chart, what's the aspect I look for? Honestly, whatever jumps out at me first. And it's usually if there is a clump of planets occupying one space is the first thing that's going to draw my eye. A stellium is what we call it, whether
I have that.
Yeah. Or anything, I tend to look at the ascendant first thing, what's on the ascendant, because that's going to be the most primary thing that comes out in your personality. The first house and the ascendant, and even anything close to the ascendant from the 12th house. Because, the ascendant tells you about your personality, but any planets that are there are going to modify that in a way that is, that is changes the lens of how things come through. And again, we have DNA, we have cultural identity, we have other things that are going on, but it's the recognition of patterns that come through. So probably the first thing, I think, looking at a chart, the first place I'm going to go, unless there's something else that takes my attention to it, is usually at the ascendant and anything that's going on there. And then I want to find the sun and moon, obviously. And I think just as strong as all of those is Saturn. Because Saturn defines our physical reality. It defines the reality we exist in. And that is, that's the world we move in. And how is Saturn placed? How is it aspected? And how does it come through in the chart? Those are the most important things for just getting a sense of who someone is, especially if I've never met them.
When you were talking about the first house and the ascendant ruling the first house, and in my brain it popped into I have a friend, and I know that you know who I'm talking about because I know you've done her chart, but she's got sun, moon, and rising in Virgo, and Venus all happening in Virgo, all in the first house. And I just had this realization that recently that it's all in the first house. I'm like, no wonder you think you're the star. No wonder you're always, even the star card comes up for her all the time when I'm reading in tarot, and it's become an inside joke.
Okay.
But all the Virgos.
The Virgo does definitely want to help. That is kind of what, the energy of Virgo is that of a helper. They want to make things better. Very generally speaking.
Well, they're definitely a fantastic human. One of my favorites.
Oh yeah.
So
I love Virgos. They keep my Pisces kind of stabilized.
yes. We love our Virgos and their charts.
Yeah.
And their lists.
and they can do
Yes.
things. They know how to do things.
Oh, I know.
Like like mechanical or something. Like, I'm lost. I
They
can't follow
understand.
instructions to save my life.
Yep.
You know,
I feel that.
where's my Virgo? Because you
Yeah,
can
well,
do this. I'll buy you a
I've got
pizza.
one on dial, speed dial
Yep.
if you need a Virgo. Just saying. I know a good one.
Mhm.
So pulling this back to the topic of, queer spirituality or queer witchuality, what kind of queer archetypes can you kind of see popping up in different aspects of astrology? Because I remember mentioning that I always like to see Jupiter as like a big loving bear daddy, but then you mentioned Saturn and I'm like, ooh, he's kind of a daddy too, but it's
Saturn
different.
Saturn is kind of the daddy, but Saturn's a stern daddy.
Yeah.
Saturn's a stricter one.
What is like Jupiter, the big gay uncle?
Well, he could be daddy too, but he's more of a fun one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Jupiter tends to be very large and expansive, and I think of this big laugh and looking for fun and exploring different things. So it's, depending on the nature of your relationship, he could be the uncle who swings into town and buys you all the cool things and take you to all the cool places before he goes off again. Where you're left with Saturn, who's your father, who makes sure you go to school and eat your vegetables. As we grow up and have other definitions of what daddy can mean, because I know what you mean by that. This could definitely be follow along those lines as well. Jupiter giving you experiences that you haven't had before, fun and exploration and things that maybe even exploration into things you may not take on permanently, but let's try this out and see if it works, because Jupiter is about many times taking a leap of faith. And let's just do this. It doesn't matter. Okay, if it doesn't turn out, then we know. Now we know, and we won't do it again, or maybe we will, or maybe not this, but this. It's Jupiter. It gives you choices usually. Not all of those choices can be good choices, and not all of them lead somewhere. But it is definitely not a sense of permanence or stability. That is not Jupiter. Jupiter's about exploration and expansion, and believing that everything will be okay. It's a very faith-based kind of thing. I'm talking about every side has a shadow. Jupiter can also be very domineering and egotistical because they think they know everything. But generally speaking, if you're dealing with a healthy Jupiter, it's just fun. And you learn. It's learning. It's about learning through doing things. It rules universities as well, and higher learning and travel, going all over.
So Jupiter's the big bear daddy that I would want.
Yeah, well, Saturn could be a very big. If you're into a more disciplined state, Saturn is also going to make sure that you are taken care of and that you can thrive, because Saturn is about thriving, but you have to do the work to get there. You earn everything that you get. It gives nothing for free. When Saturn compliments you, you've earned it. You know that you've done well. So, and I don't find Saturn doesn't punish you. It's not about, a lot of people are also, no, it's not, Saturn is not about punishment, but it is about consequences. You've done this, now this is going to happen. It's cause and effect. So, no, you didn't do the work you needed to do. So, no, you're not going to get a promotion, or you're not going to get an A class, or, you're whatever it is, because you didn't do what you needed to do in order to make it happen. Saturn is very systematic and do this. So if you're looking at a daddy in that way, you could look at a strict disciplinarian, but also somebody. I said Saturn's involved in a lot of kink and stuff like that. I mean, when I look at people who are really into that scene, Saturn is usually very dominant.
Interesting.
Because it's about discipline, and it's about boundaries. Saturn is about where do we put up the boundaries? How do we move them around, and how do we play with them? A lot of that is about what that is,
Yeah, that's
following
fascinating.
rules. So
what other queer archetypes do you see pop up in your
Uranus is the rebel. Uranus is revolution and uprising and going against the norm and doing things different and doing
like
it
punk
loudly.
rock.
It's an outer planet, so it's much more collective, but it's where we do something different in order to make things. All the outer planets are there to kind of demolish, or in their own ways. Saturn sets up the rules of reality, in how things are, but the outer planets are there. All structure becomes obsolete. So the outer planets get rid of that in a certain way. And Uranus is very rebellious. The idea of revolution, the idea of uprising, the idea of union. It's a collective of people who are, I think of a union strike is very Uranus.
So what's Uranus been doing lately?
Well, Uranus has been moving through Taurus, which Taurus is the sign of stability and the economy, which can tank. Or it isn't, Uranus isn't necessarily about the economy tanking, but you go through wild fluctuations.
Yep.
Things go up and down. It's a roller coaster. And Taurus is about all of the resources that we have. And I'm not huge on mundane astrology. I'm learning more, but I usually go to other people for that because I focus on more of the personal. But if you're looking at it from a mundane point of view, Uranus and Taurus, the fluctuating economy, the availability of resources, especially stuff like food or housing, because Taurus wants security. Uranus is in fall in Taurus, and it doesn't necessarily like being there. But what Taurus is about the resources that we have, and Uranus, okay, what other ways can we do this? What do we need to innovate or change in order to create more, and if you're in a place where there's an idea of lack, then Uranus is going to rise up and demand change. A lot of, that is part of what's going on out there right now, but so is Pluto.
Right.
Pluto's doing a lot of stuff, but
retrograding.
Well, the outer planets retrograde usually 6 months out of the year. The retrograde isn't so much, it's the aspects that it makes to other planets. Because it moves so slow, it has a very profound effect. All the outer planets do. Pluto's moving into Aquarius now. It's back in Capricorn to kind of clean things up for the time being, but it'll go back into Aquarius at the beginning of next year. And then I think towards the end of the year, it has another retrograde into Capricorn for 2 months or so. And then it's in Aquarius until 2042. So if you're looking at that, I mean, this is, going
big shift
in a different shift, but, Pluto is about dismantling all of the things. It is complete eradication. It raises things to the ground. And these are things that are no longer useful to you. It is the way, and it is also your identification with it. So it can be a very personal, very painful thing. Pluto's the Lord of Death.
The Dark Daddy.
Yeah,
Hades.
Hades. Yeah, it's definitely an idea of that. I think the archetypes of the planets are bigger than the gods we named after them. And don't get me wrong, the gods are huge.
Fair.
But I'm not trying to make that.
That's why there's so many different ways to describe them.
It's another set of symbolism that from a culture that understood it as this.
Right.
But Pluto is also the richest under the earth. So as we dig down into the earth, then we find what's underneath. And I heard this recently by one of the astrologers I follow, and I love it, is Pluto makes us look at where we think we have power and then takes it away. Ooh. So we have to find what our real power is. And this is not a loving, fun process.
Yeah.
Pluto is not about making you feel better. The process of enlightenment is not fun, good times, happy. I'm not saying you're never. It's just not its function. Its function is to take away from you what no longer works so you can claim your power. This is a hard process. And Uranus is about freeing yourself from what has held you back. It's liberation, usually in the form of change and rebellion and doing things different. So going back to the idea of a queer archetype, definitely somebody throwing a brick during during a raid by police is absolute. That is Uranus. That is textbook Uranus. You are going to do this. No, I'm not. And here's and the brick gets thrown. It's because the outer planets are so collective. I think of Uranus as like a union strike, like I said. And this isn't always stuff. The Third Reich was also very Uranian. The idea of a perfect culture, and when you look at the Nuremberg, those old films with everyone raising their hands, that's absolutely terrifying. But that's also absolutely Uranus. It's their idea of what utopia would be. Uranus is kind of like, what's the ideal society? The deepest shadow, every planetary energy has its shadow, and Uranus is, to me, and I'm not a Trekkie or anything, Well, the best way for me, even more than that, the idea of the shadow of Uranus, the darkest thing I can come up with is from Star Trek. It's the idea of the Borg.
Okay.
Oh man.
You will be assimilated.
That messes me up too, because
right.
because I think too hard about the Borg when I go through some Star
Because
Trek
it's terrifying. There
is.
is no more individuality.
You will
You
assimilate.
are assimilated, and you know, that is the deepest shadow of, you know, with Pluto moving into Aquarius now, there's going to be a level of groupthink that we have to be careful of, because Pluto is ruthless, and Uranus will be going into Gemini as well. So we have, you know, not yet. It's still moving through Taurus. It's still a couple of years away, but it will be happening at the same time. Pluto will be in Aquarius for a very long time. Uranus stays in the sign for about 8 years, and it will be going into Gemini, which is unleashing the way, you know, unchaining ourselves in the way we used to think and the ideas we would come up with. So when we talk about AI and the way things are now, Uranus going into Gemini is going, oof.
A quote that I've heard recently, and you talked about Uranus, and it's making me, this quote running through and through in my head. My partner found it the other day and said, I need this on my wall, is, in order to break the rules, you have to understand the rules.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And that feels so, when you're talking about Saturn and disciplinarian, and this is the strict, these are the rules, boom, 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 boom. And here's Uranus going, okay, I know those. Now let's break them and turn them into something else.
Because it's definitely thinking outside the box. And when you talk, I mean, we're getting away from the queer archetype here, but
I'll bring it back.
We can apply it to that. We can obviously apply it to that, obviously. But the sign Aquarius, the energy of Aquarius is traditionally ruled by Saturn, but in modern times is ruled by Uranus. So it has both of those.
Oh, okay.
And if you look at the mythology of Kronos and Uranus, Kronos was Uranus' son, but castrated him. And, you know, his genitals fell into the ocean. This is one of the myths. I'm not up on
that's
that.
How we got.
But from his severed genitals, you have Aphrodite rose out of the ocean. And so did the Furies, you know? So you have, this was a creation. But when you look at Saturn, which is the rules, castrates the free flying ideas of Uranus, you know, you can, whoa. But then Uranus also hated the ugliness of what he thought was the forms of Earth. You know, it was, Uranus was like, from my understanding, was like the perfect geometry of the heavens. So when it came into form, it was no longer perfect. So he didn't, you know, so he tried to fly high above that. So you can go, you know, the mythology speaks to how these energies can interact with each other.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And you bring up,
as a queer archetype, you definitely have the rebel, the revolutionary.
Yes.
Also, somebody who is, even in times when there isn't like uprising where that's not acceptable, Uranus is also the queer auntie, or uncle, who comes in and, you know, recognizes that in the little kid, and they become close, and, you know, it becomes like a mentor to, you know, that's that kind of thing, where, you know, or a teacher, or someone who can a level of access to somebody who otherwise wouldn't have, as they're growing, as they're learning. To help them break what they're, you know, the change, to give them a better idea of who they are. You know, that kind of thing is also very Uranian, and Neptunian would be a mystical, the mystic living in the woods or in the water, and that's probably more appropriate to say. But somebody who is not quite accessible, but who is, and even when they're there, they're kind of not, because it's so ethereal. Somebody who has access to deeper truths. That's how Neptune erodes the structures of Saturn, through, you know, water wearing it all away. It's the water will win. It will erode the hardest and biggest of stones. It may take 10 million years, but it'll do it. Mars is always going to have the archetype of a jock, or a muscly kind of male youth, and, you know, put Uranus with that, you know, you could get, you know, your dance clubs. Honestly, it's I don't know if any one planet, it's going to be planets and aspects is what we'll bring about. And a lot of times it's Uranus that is aspecting another one of the planets that will that'll send it wonky, because it's like, okay, we are no longer following the mainstream.
Okay.
with this. It doesn't necessarily mean queer, but it very often it can. And there's other, depending on what houses you find planets, but I think that's the easiest way for me, how I would identify it.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Mercury as our, Hermes or hermaphroditic, and or the
Hermes is
go-go
a dual,
dancer
is
twink.
definitely Mercury is definitely another dual energy. That is
Gemini.
which rules Gemini and Virgo. So there is that. Traditionally, Virgo. We don't have another official ruler for Virgo at this time. There's talk of other things, but nothing that's been established and accepted. So there is definitely a duality there, and so Uranus and Mercury together. I mean, somebody who can go all over the place has a lot of access to different places. And this is all very general. I mean, these are
because you would have to look at somebody's specific chart to ever be able to
really
specific,
Because honestly, you could have these free flying examples and then put a negative or a hard, I don't like positive or negative, but a hard aspect from Saturn or Pluto, and then you get somebody who's not a safe person to be around necessarily. They have a harder edge, or they may be more personally inclined. So it all depends on how things come up. Not everything is this huge positive thing.
Right.
It's all, and then, once again, history, DNA, all that matters too. The difference between genetics and epigenetics, it's like that. You have to bring history into everything. The astrology is, again, the almost like a blueprint where what the patterns can represent, but they can go in different ways.
Yeah, I really do love when we have sat down and done one-on-one sessions, because not only have you talked to me about my birth chart, but you will often look and see how it's connecting to what's going on right now in the skies.
Oh, definitely.
Other thing that I love that you do is the Patreon, where you just say, we're on this day and right now the moon just did this.
Yeah, that came about. Everyone had always said I needed to do something, but like I said, writing doesn't really work for me. And I've tried it. It's not like, oh, I can't do that. I've tried it, and it's very, very difficult. And I don't enjoy it. So that's another thing. If I enjoyed it, I would probably find a way to make it work. I knew I had to do something. Something was going on in my own chart. About using my voice, and I knew I wanted to. And I tried writing little blurbs here and there, and it just. But then one day, and it actually came from spirit, from a conversation I was having with another person, my roommate, who said, but just talk, because you have a conversation with me, it's going to come up. Sooner or later, it will start coming out of my mouth. He calls me an astrological see and say. But I try not to. I try to recognize when people's eyes are starting to glaze over, because it's just something that this is the nerd.
I love
this is the geek level in me that just, I find it fascinating. So I will. Don't get me started on other pop culture things, TV shows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, astrology, all that. I will.
I was gonna say, you again, proud geek, standing right here in front of you, or sitting right here in front of you. And again, it's right in my intro.
This is where we see the patterns played out.
Yes.
Where we can see, even if they don't realize, they're not doing this, but you can see how they're played out, and that's what fascinates me. And the different ways it can be, because it's not always going to be the same thing. So anyway, the Patreon came about simply because I picked up my phone and started talking to it. This is what's going on today. I started the Patreon. It's had a slow start. I'm not very good at advertising, and I'm also in grad school. I'm so very busy right now. It's such a profound effect on the collective.
Right.
And personally, what we're all going through, and it's different enough that I want to talk about it. But I have tried to pare it down, because I can go on too long with the way the culture is now. And I mean, it is what it is, and everything evolves, but there's so much very short. Like I love watching TikToks, but the thing that's good about them is they're short.
Right.
Do that. It's so difficult. I just someone once said, it's like you're dictating. I'm plugging in and having it come through me. And yes.
Well, and I plug you in, particularly when I can access you through like an app like YouTube, which will run in the background like a podcast.
Yeah.
And so I'm listening to you like a podcast. So, I love the videos that you send, that you've shared. I can't wait to sign up for your Patreon. I can't wait till I have the income that allows me to do that. And I'm grateful that you
small. I don't want
to. It'll get bigger though.
I'm not going to get rich off this. That's just
no.
It's not.
But you deserve a little bit of tips for your emotional labor, because you do kind of give us heads up. And sometimes when you give me a heads up, I'll pass it along to the right people who seem to be needing that kind of reminder. I'm just be like, oh, I think that you might want to hear this. And then they'll be like, oh, thank you for telling me what Ken sent you, because man, I needed to know that.
It started with me just doing the lunations, the full moon and the new moon, and just doing them every 2 weeks because that was just easy. But then, this is a big aspect. This planet's going retrograde. People always talk about Mercury retrograde and like the world's going to end. Like, no, it's not. But there may be some things you want to be aware of, and so there's that, and that's what I want to talk about, or some big opposition or square or a T-square or something that's coming up. Big aspect. So in October, we're going to be talking about eclipses because we'll be back.
Okay.
Season. And it's going to be a change because the nodes have shifted signs. Eclipses are based on where the North Node and the South Node are, and it has moved. They transit retrograde. They've been in Taurus and Scorpio for the last year and a half or so, and now they're in Aries and Libra. Okay. So I think the first solar eclipse in October will be in Libra. But then the next lunar eclipse, it won't be in Aries yet. It'll be our last lunar eclipse in Scorpio, I think, or maybe that may be reversed. It maybe I have to check it out because I haven't looked at. I know they're happening, but I haven't dissected what they are yet because we're not there yet. Yep. But I know one of them is going to be a Taurus. It'll be the last Taurus eclipse of the cycle, and I think it's a lunar one. Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah. That'll be interesting. You'll be able to follow Ken and hear exactly what's happening with everything that's happening with all the eclipses.
We will definitely leave a link to your Patreon in our show notes in case anybody is intrigued and is loving, the rambles as much as I do. Because it tingles my brain. It's not it's not my expertise, but it tingles my brain.
It's fascinating. It's so interesting to see what the are something. I had that passion of like going, what are they? How are these doing? And then I would just my eyes would start glazing over when I got to the various nodes and how they square and they trine and what that means. And it's like, okay, I knew I need to understand this because I know it's so incredibly important, but it's just, it's getting that first step and like finding that connection to make it interesting. And what I have heard of you, that's what's happening. I'm at that transitional point in myself where this is what the next thing I need to really learn and understand.
That's what I try and do is explain this is what this means, because it took me a long time to find the books or the explanation. I actually met, honestly, I went to a psychic bookshop and went to a reader. And I kept going to her. I would see her, like, you're coming so much. I'd see her like every month or 2 months or so. And it's like, you need readings a lot. It's like, honestly, I looked at it as school. She told me what to read. She told me what to look for. We dissected charts together. That's probably what taught me more than anything. And it was from her explanation that I started running with it. And
I love that you say that, because I was sitting here thinking that, yes, TikTok and yes, astrology apps, I do dabble in those quite a bit as well, but so much of what I do retain and know is just from listening to what you're willing to share, what you're able to share, because you make it make sense in my brain. Yeah. And it could just be the, neurospicy connections that we understand. We speak that language.
Yeah. And it is a language. It is something that is, that carries that level of continuity. And I try to not make them too long because I can go and go. But a lot of times when I listen to it, when I do that, I listen to it and I start repeating myself. And that's what I'm trying to cut down on and not, and just have the information. This is what you need to know.
Yeah. Do you edit yours? Or do you just...
I don't know how to do that yet.
Fair.
So I have,
same.
I have literally just done one and watched it and been like, oh no, I got to do that again. So I go out and it's frustrating. Maybe I'll do it the next day. I'll give myself a little time to. But there are some I can just go out and do them, and that's what I try and do. If I know what it is, just this is what's going on. There are some more and more now. I just find I go out and do it, and it's done, and it's not polished. It's not edited.
But sometimes that's more real.
Yeah, it's
And
beautiful legacy work
that
because
speaks to someone more.
it gives us you,
And I try
preserved
to
in history.
I do this on my Facebook page just for fun, and I've done it for years, but I'll put them in the Patreon also, where the aspects going on what I saw in Linda Goodman's, I'll pick a pop song that speaks of the energy to me. And I'll put those in the Patreon. It's just something I put in there. It's nothing that
I love
because it's not my work. It's somebody else's, property.
Yeah.
So I can't really charge for that. When we had in 2020, January 12th, 2020, we had this huge conjunction. It was basically, we knew something big was going to come out of it. And what came out of it was the pandemic. It was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction that also involved the Sun, Mercury, and I believe the dwarf planet Ceres. They were all conjunct in Capricorn. And whenever Saturn and Pluto coming together is a cycle of roughly 30 years apart, and things can change. It's not always a pandemic, but it has been before. But we knew something big was going to happen. And the song that I picked for that day was the Rolling Stones' "Sympathy for the Devil." And that came up in a memory, like, wow, because I don't think about it. I look at the aspect, I feel it out, and what starts playing in my head. And I started hearing the woo woo, that. So yeah, that was just one that
I sometimes
stuck. And when the memory came up, I was like, oh, well,
it's very interesting.
Yeah. Yes. And it's my perception of it. So I'll be with my roommate who's learning. It's like, well, I don't see it as that. Well, then you don't. But this is what makes me feel. It's because we all have different relationships to planets wherever they fall. Yes. So
I sometimes will add a song to a tarot reading that I'm delivering. I'm just like, I did this. And as I'm, receiving the message, this song plays in my brain. It has the lyrics that I feel like you need to listen to. So I'll send them a link to the song and be like, and every once in a while you'll post a song and I'm just like, yes.
We're getting close to the end, but we've still got a little bit of time.
Okay.
One more of the questions I don't think we truly kind of addressed, but we can definitely bring it up. Though we touched on a lot of it. So some of these were kind of like flowing through questions, but we're also kind of tying them all back into each other, is when you work with people who are queer and struggling with their identity. So in that point where we're trying to figure out who we are and struggling with that aspect of being queer, how can you as an astrologer help them understand and come to terms with their own queer identity?
That's almost putting on a different hat, because I am also a counselor in work, and I'm in grad school for social work. So that I try not to mix the two, but you can't. I don't, when I'm reading somebody, I don't want to become a counselor because I'm not. But using astrology in that sense, because I always go back to astrology. I can't help myself. It always, that's just the lens that I view the world through. Well, it depends on where they are, what they accept. I want to find out where they are. You always meet them where they are, no matter where you are.
Yeah.
No matter what hat I'm wearing. But when I look at a chart, and I really want to look and see if they're having challenging aspects, or if they're just coming out of a challenging aspect. Whether if I can't find one in a transit, then I need to look at a progression or a solar arc progression, which are two other ways of looking at it. And generally what I'm going to find is some sort of outer planet transit to something personal, because those signify breakthroughs and change. They are upheavals that happen in our lives, like in their fashion, where Uranus is the aha lightning strike moment, and where things get unearthed. Neptune is the eroding away of old thought forms. It's much more slow and gradual, and there's a level of you can fall into depression with that one, or artistic creation. It's not all bad. None of these are strictly you go into a bad place. But if you're in a challenging aspect, there's going to be challenging things that come up in your life, and if the Sun or Saturn or another personal planet is involved by one of these outer planets that signify great change, and especially Pluto, which is the death one, or Chiron, which is a minor planet, but I use it as an outer planet because it's so focused on where our wounds are, then our identity is shifting. And that is not something that can be rushed. That is not something that can and the thing I no matter what I'm doing, I can't tell them what that is. First of all, I don't know what that is. Right. I may have an idea, or I may see the patterns, but they need to find out what that is. But helping them maybe come to a place of accepting that this is the reality right now. This is what's happening, and this is what has to be addressed. And giving them as much space to work with that as they can in whatever way. but also looking at the planets. Okay, what might be coming next? What else is coming up? And this is not something I'm going to say to them. But it gives me an idea of what to look out for, or what they, look out. Maybe something's coming next from your family or your job, or, because depending on where things are, there are levels of focus that, where, if I see something in the 10th house, I'm generally going to think something's up with either your job, if you've got a career, or your place in the public, how you are perceived by the public around you, your reputation or something like that. And that's, once again, a very general read, but it gives me an idea of where to look.
I'm sure sometimes, at least for me, knowing the patterns of what's happening makes me feel like I'm not going crazy.
Yeah.
That this is okay. Hey, this is what's happening around it. That's a different lens to look at the perspective. And to me, that gives me its own kind of comfort.
Yeah.
So it's like that's the comfort I need to get through this aspect and what's going on. But sometimes I think, to me, that would be helpful, is just knowing those patterns.
It makes me think of the name of the chat group that I have with Ken and another friend is WTF Planets, where we will always be like, Ken, WTF Planets. But the other thing about the birth charts, what I feel like when I've received information based on looking at my birth chart, it makes me think, oh, no wonder I am the way I am. That makes so much sense. And now I don't have to feel ashamed about that. I can just lean into it and embrace it and just be like, you know what? Hey, I'm a little airheaded. I got a lot of air signs. I got a lot going on in Gemini. Sorry about it.
Well, also look at, what the other side of that spectrum is with Gemini. It's also about curiosity and learning and communicating with people and make networking and finding, that's,
I'm a big fan.
Yeah. There's so much. A butterfly isn't going to sit on one flower and just stay there.
Yeah.
That's, and another, going back to the other question, I think a good thing to know when I'm working with somebody who's challenged by a certain thing, I am going to look at Saturn, because I want to see how their reality is challenged. Saturn to me is always what our reality is, where it is. This is our current reality. How is this being challenged or challenging whatever's going on? Saturn is usually a good place to start with anything. Just because it's just so, it is very important. It is a very important planet to look at.
Certain things about astrology has gone mainstream over the years, one of them being Mercury retrograde, but the other one, I swear to God, is Saturn return. And so many people know about their Saturn return now, which is great, because I remember when I didn't know about it, and I learned just before my first one, and it really shapes the way I do meet people where they are, because sometimes I really want to know, like, are you experiencing this upheaval because you're approaching a return?
Yeah, and we have a lot of returns. There's everything. Well, every year we have a solar return. Every month we have a lunar return,
which I love celebrating.
Yeah, the inner planets happen a lot more often, but if Jupiter returns roughly every 12 years, Saturn roughly every 29 years. But then you also look at the squares for in your mid 30s, and it depends. I remember I had a huge upheaval. At 36, I had a Pluto, my first Pluto square. Because Pluto, it takes 248 years to go all the way around. So we're not going to have a Pluto return,
right?
Unless they really make our lives longer. But you do have the other aspects. You have the sextiles and the squares and so forth. And because it's such an elliptical orbit, it's different depending on where you are. But I had my Pluto square at 36. And talk about losing your power to find what it really is. That's when I went into recovery. So that was, that also happened at a Jupiter, very close to a Jupiter return. I had a very active chart at the time. But stuff like that, Neptune squares, between 38 and 43 is the Uranus opposition. If you live to be 84, you'll have a Uranus return, but the Uranus opposition is generally known as the midlife crisis. Yeah, we have returns all over the place. Uranus is very much about releasing from the past to do something new, to innovate and change. I just had it cross my ascendant, and I think Damona, who's known me for a while, can attest to the intense and complete changes I've gone through, both internally and externally. I don't even look like the same person. So it's that is
lots of transformations.
Yeah.
and professionally too.
Mhm. Oh, I'm not even the same
Every
person I
level.
was 3 years ago.
But I
Yeah.
love it because I love knowing you through every aspect of it all.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been a journey, and it
I'm
continues. I mean, now
Mhm.
there's more stuff coming. You
Yeah.
people will come to me and say, "No, there's nothing going on. I'm so bored." And I'm like, "Shh, you're fine." Boredom is fantastic because
Enjoy
we
it while it
generally don't
lasts.
get to choose when things
Yeah.
get exciting, and it's not
Bor-
under our control. So enjoy
Boarding
it
is-
while it's happening.
Yeah. Boredom
Because
is
it's not going to
underrated.
stay.
Oh
Well,
man.
I know that I am absolutely looking forward to doing some offline one-on-one and getting the study of my birth chart, because
Sure.
I've wanted to, and like now it's like, yes, no, this is like cementing. I must do this.
Yeah.
So I will be contacting you afterwards separately to do that. But
Excellent.
Thank you so much, for being our special guest. I'm very grateful that you were able to make time for us and are
Yes.
willing to come.
I'm
show
honored
us
that
your-
you asked me. I
Oh,
don't do stuff like this.
you're like top of our list. I mean, not like
Yes.
top because you're not our first guest, the second, but still
Yeah.
like pretty high up there.
The fact that I was asked, I'm very happy and very honored.
Like I said, I was
Same,
very
same.
excited.
You honor us with your brilliance, and you've definitely inspired me. Every time I talk to you, I'm just like, oh, now I want to go back and look at my birth chart and see where Uranus and Neptune are hanging out. Thanks for listening to the Queer Witch Project. If you enjoyed this topic, make sure that you like or subscribe or leave us a comment.
And if there is a topic that you would like to know more about, or an episode topic you would like to suggest, please contact us at thequeerwitchproject@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with the handle @queerwitchproject. We upload twice a month. Now remember, queerness is a key to magic.
Be yourself and love rebelliously. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much, Ken. Neurospicy. That's the one I always mess up on. Anyway, let's do that again.
Yeah,
Stop,
Uranus.
because I'm in that too, Shay.
I quit my job and moved to Portland, and but what's cute is you have the Uranus opposition, which tells you need to let go of things because you're not getting any younger, and you need to find your freedom, and you need to be true to yourself. And not long after that, you have your second Saturn opposition, which then tells you, what the hell did you do?
No, I'm
I'm
laughing because I was married and I got divorced after 18 years of marriage at 39, or separated at 39, and my life has just gone poof out at a completely different trajectory, and in a way that to me it's much better. But yes, you just said that, and like I lost it because first Saturn returns, I didn't learn about it till afterwards, and I went, oh, okay, now that makes a lot more sense, and now this is making a lot more sense.